we all contribute as team members and we all receive as team members. Like, how do we build that mutuality into the way in which we actually show up as a team?
Hey, it's Nikki, Llewellyn Gregory, and you're on Gut Plus Science. You're in for a fast-paced, storytelling, action item-rich leadership growth experience. I hope you make this podcast a habit. I consider it a leadership mentoring tool. Learning together makes us better together, and that is how we change the world around us. Let's get to it.
Hey, it's Nikki back on Gut Plus Science, and I am so looking forward to this conversation today. I've recently learned about a company called Sunny and have met some different people over at Sunny, and so has my team at People Forward Network. And today I am with Dr. Iain Smith, who's the head of behavioral science for Sunny. He is an IO psychologist and is really gonna, I think, lay the foundation for our future partnership with anything that we do together at Sunny because, we're really focused on at People Forward Network and what we do at Gut Plus Science. Meaningful work for all people. That's been my mission for a long time. Gut Plus Science was way before People Forward Network. And Gut Plus Science is the gut, the gut, the heart, the how I feel about leading and moving in this world, particularly in the workplace. And then the science is the research, right? Like the data, the learning, the knowledge, those kinds of things. So who better to be here than Dr. Iain Smith? I'm so excited. So Iain, we'll call you Iain for the rest of the time if that's okay. I know we're going to talk about connection first. Culture follows. Culture isn't a program, it's a pattern of connection. So let's open up right there. Of all things we could be talking about, why is this the topic that you chose to focus in on today?
Yeah, I mean, connection is everything that Sunny does, and it's a funny word because it has lots of different meanings, right? Lots of different understandings and interpretations. So it's not always actually the most helpful word, but what's really clear is that it's in decline in society and in the workplace. It's a fundamental human need. We need to be connected. We're a social species. And we get a lot of benefits personally and collectively when we are more connected. So all the work that we do at Sunny, we're a nonprofit, and it's all about how do we learn and redesign connection back into work, back into life, back into society.
And what's your journey to how you got into this work? And then why Sunny?
Yeah, I've been an applied psychologist for the last 15 years or so. I've been fascinated always since, I don't know, my first work experiences with like the workplace is a really funny place, like the dynamics are different, always changing, really impactful on people's lives. We spend a majority, like, I don't know, what is it, like a third or over a third of our life in the workplace.
The majority of our waking hours as a human are that is it, I'm really passionate about looking at those stats. So, from your perspective as a behavioral scientist, what's fundamentally like broken that's at the base? Let's build from the base to really build those cultures.
Yeah, totally. And just quickly on culture, because I think it's worth talking about this. Like psychologists hate the word culture and the concept of culture because it's impossible to measure. You can't measure culture. And when you think about, so just for the purposes of this conversation, I describe culture as the way work gets done around here, which means it's kind of a description of the way we behave and interact with one another. So what's interesting about that is just from the off, I've seen so many organizations focus on culture change. You hear it all the time, right? It's in the podcast episodes, but that's fundamentally a problem. You can't change this amorphous blob that's descriptive inherently. It is actually a description of behavior. And behavior is a function of how we interact, right? So hopefully that's not too academic. Like when we talk about connection and culture, connection is like how every individual in a team in a workplace turns up to work and works with one another. And that is what culture is a description of. And so when we think about how workplaces are broken and certainly changed over the last 10 years, I think a lot of that has just happened really, really quickly, but really in really hidden ways. So I think about 10 years ago, and the workplace was so different. We were generally all in offices. We still had conference phones. Do you remember like a conference phone in
Oh,
a
sure.
meeting room?
I remember a fax machine.
Right, exactly. I'm like,
I never liked them. I never liked the fax machine. I was like, why is this taking so long?
I love a conference phone. Like some of
Conference
my
phone, yeah.
like working with clients and that
Yeah.
moment, I still think about this a lot. Like that moment when you have a really good moment in a client call, you maybe win someone over to an idea, and there's that like little invisible high five in the conference room because we weren't on Zoom, we weren't on video all the time.
Okay, so back to the way work gets done around here. I want you to elaborate on that because I think people what examples?
Yeah, totally. And I'm like, so again, going to connection, connection, we didn't need to think about it. We've never really, as a species, needed to think about it because we have evolved to like live in communities, live in neighborhoods where we're with one another, so connections built in, working. We would turn up to the office and you would have your little routines, right? Like I remember making breakfast in an office and you'd naturally speak to the same two or three people and you're there, you're in it and the workflow was simpler. And where we're going now, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I want to be clear. Like at Sunny, we're not all about like getting rid of binning off technology and going back to being in person. But like we've lowered in all these different tech components. We are much more mixed as a workplace. Some people are in the office, some people are hybrid, some people are remote. Like we've added a lot of complexity, and it has disrupted like the rhythms and routines that we took for granted. But there also hasn't really been a good system, a good behavioral anchor that brings it all back together in a cohesive way. Every platform you use, if it's Slack or Zoom, and the average employee manages over 11 of these platforms in a given day. So over 11 we're switching between. Every platform has its own operating model, its own way of like using a platform, right? But there aren't really overarching like ways of working, and we've left managers completely unequipped to just like surf through this, while at the same time they're now embedding AI and agentic resources into their teams to establish these new ways of working that ultimately kind of encourage the behaviors that we want, which ultimately is what we talk about when we describe a culture.
So good. So I think of a few examples over my time. Very, very, very passionate about culture. I do think you can measure employee engagement with the right tools. Some kind of a validated survey tool that's not once a year. It's like maybe, once a month or twice a month or something. Doesn't have to be 500 questions. It could just be a few. And that does help us understand, people and the way we work around here. And sometimes what comes out of that is someone's feeling disconnected. And why they're feeling disconnected is because they didn't know how we work around here. If we're live, is, people, they spend 15 minutes at the, I don't know, water cooler or whatever. And that's how you can kind of plug in kind of to kick off your day. Or if you're on remote, which I prefer remote. I really love remote. I love seeing people in person as well. But I think, okay, if a to use your words of what you were sharing earlier with ritual, we have one channel that's like the check-in channel, where we go. So there's so many different ways, and how we work around here is like so easy to get confused because you have to get clear and remind. But I just wanted to share those couple of examples. So
Yeah, I think that's really important. And just to build on that quickly, like, so if psychologists don't like the idea of culture, what we do like is this idea of climate, which is kind of a slice across a culture. So there are measurement tools out there for a climate of ethics or a climate of inclusion or a climate of psychological safety. So you almost cut and measure a precise aspect of employee experience, which is really helpful. And then, of course, you can measure behaviors. And that's what's really interesting now is how do we, on a more granular daily basis, even with passive data where we're just observing what's happening in teams, how do we start to see what are the rates and the occurrences of these really beneficial behaviors, supporting one another, asking for help, giving help, energizing one another. I think employee energy is fascinating, like how we bringing energy to our interactions, even if we're virtual. So there's these different components that we can start to measure and encourage behaviorally, and then see how they show up in things like engagement, but also these other cuts of climate.
we use Slack. I really, really like Slack. And we have a lot of channels on Slack. We try to keep them. It's like, who needs to be on what? You know what I mean? But there's one, we call it celebrations. And then we have a dash on it, says gains, GAINZ. Well, celebrations is like those small wins, the big wins, that kind. Well, we had a retreat, a company retreat, and we had this game that we have actually Lucy, who is the producer of the show, she brought the game, and it was gains became a joke, like gains, like winning, right? So we added it in, and so celebrations like celebrate the wins, but this is everybody's job on the team to it's everybody's job to recognize that, particularly in remote, it's ritual, right? To what you're talking about. And it's just so powerful.
Well, man, I love that you say it's like it's everyone's job, that shared responsibility. I see research. There was a study by the American Psychological Association 2024 showing that Gen Z, the youngest generation, are the loneliest in the workplace. I think just under 50% of the youngest generation reporting weekly experiences of loneliness at work. Now, you can take that in two ways. You can take that as, oh gosh, they're victims that aren't fitting in. Or you can take that as in the way of like these workplaces aren't creating the opportunity and responsibility. It's shared. Like we all contribute as team members and we all receive as team members. Like how do we build that mutuality into the way in which we actually show up as a team? So I love that example.
So good. So good. Okay, so I'm curious, particularly since we have this kind of specialist in the psychology arena. The pandemic taught us a lot, right? And I want to dig in from your perspective in this realm. What did the pandemic in like the digital work world that we're talking about, like what has it taught us? What are we still struggling with, not realizing? Self-awareness in any individual or leader is really important. And I like to have some new takeaways, and I'd love it for our listeners. Like, what is that we should reflect on or still be thinking about?
Yeah. One of the ways in which we conceptualize interactions in the workplace is like this blend of frequency and vibrancy. So every interaction, like the one we're having, like, walking with a colleague, like just socializing with a colleague, like the frequency, the regularity, the amount of times that you interact with someone is frequency. And then the vibrancy is like the energy exchange, the purposefulness, the usefulness, like what's going on in that interaction. And what I think we've seen is, particularly through digital mediums, the frequency is actually well up. It's not like we have this crisis where people are not communicating with one another. That's not what's going on. Microsoft, in a great report last year, estimated that on average, people receive 275 pings in a day from different platforms, different people, like, which is an incredible amount of pings and information, right? Like it's incredible. And in that same report, they reported that 80% of employees and leaders felt they don't have the time or energy they need to do their job, which is unsurprising if you're bouncing and reacting to these 275 pings. So what we've found in our research and just talking with CHROs is that we're often operating this in this environment that we call static buzz, right? It's sort of like the old staticky TVs that are on. It's like a buzzing noise. Like there's lots of interaction, there's lots of activity, there's lots of things going for our attention. And at the same time, that's had this effect of almost suppressing some of the richness of the exchange. Like it's a mile wide and an inch deep. And actually, what we would want to help teams with is how do we potentially balance and try and manage a bit more of like one of the most important bits of information to get through and increase the depth, the vibrancy, the richness of that exchange.
Mm. So good. It makes me think of I learned a little tip, and there was a lady that was on the podcast one time here on Gut Plus Science, and she said, "We have this thing that we do, which would be a ritual actually. Are you below the line or above the line?" So it's this, like the line is I'm doing good. Right. And then below the line, but they just because our frequency, people match that. It's basic, like in sales, it's mirror and matching, right? Like you're like, okay, or just in general human nature, you walk into a room, you feel the vibe. Help us with that because what we bring, is what happens.
Like I feel indebted to an early mentor in my career who just gave me the advice, particularly when I was like young and stupid, and not experienced in the workplace. It's like you don't have workplace experience, but what you can do is bring more energy than anyone else to an interaction. And I love that advice. Like, like, and it's within everyone's control. There's another thing. Like, I don't know if we want to, if I can ramble on a little bit, but like, I'm really passionate about this whole introversion myth and how stupid it is. Like personality, we start to bucket ourselves into either an extrovert or an introvert. We've got this really weird binary perception of personality, and I hadn't, in my past career, managing a team, I had people who were like, I'm an introvert. I can't speak. I can't bring the energy. I'm like, no, we're all like, we're not one or the other. Like, personality is actually a spectrum, and we exhibit all the spectrum generally in all of our interactions. You can bring the energy even if you're an introvert. I would show up as introverted on scales, but you can still bring that energy. It's still in your control. And when you think about the best teams you've been a part of, aren't you energized thinking about it? Like, there's that momentum and that spirit within the team, you know?
Yes. Oh. Now let's go to the connection. The really the focus for today is around connection first, culture follows. And, you know, connection as design. You had talked about that before when we met. Elaborate. Connection as design.
Yeah, it's so I come from a background of training, quite a lot of training and development, and so a traditional approach to behavior change is, let's put managers in a training session, let's give them the skill, and then let's kind of hope that they go back and remember enough of it that it has an impact. There are skills involved in connection, to some extent, but I think we overemphasize them. There's this whole myth of like Gen Z don't have social skill, and I just don't think it's true. The science doesn't back it up. Instead, my belief is that it's a product of our environment, a product of our way of working. If you have the right environment, psycho, social, digital environment, right? Like the way in which we're working, that enables these latent behaviors to take place. So if you're set up in the right way, then connection as a way of working, because again, connection can sound like an end goal. It's not. It's actually just how we are going to work effectively together, sustainably together. Like if you design it into the right, into the team, into like how we logging on, how we checking in on our tasks for the day, speaking up when we need help, like all these different interactions that need to take place, how we enabling them to happen in the optimal way, it will flow. And I think the lack of connection at the moment is because we're just trying to find a new way of redesigning it in as we've gone through such major transformation in the workplace.
That's so good. Let's stick with the generations in the workplace for a second. When you said Gen Z and you gave an example, when you look at Gen Z and everything that you know from your work and what they want today, let's take it into office or virtual remote. In connection, what is it? What have you learned is important to them?
Actually, to be really honest, not so much. I'm not so sure on what's important to them in terms of sentiment. What I do hear is that there's this myth that I think becomes exacerbated because it's a myth. And I feel like we were there with the millennial myth, a decade ago, of like millennials were in the same place, right? Of being antisocial and not able to like
Well, I'm a
contribute.
millennial.
Same,
I'm a
same.
millennial. Yeah. I know. I never felt like I fit the label. I was like, no, actually, I do like to work. Yep. No, I do take ownership. No, and so,
Do you know what's really funny, by the way? In Steven Pinker's book, I think it's Elements of Style, he talks about in Sanskrit tablets that there's complaints about the new generation not writing properly anymore. Like I'm pretty sure like every generation, there's this like paranoia about communication and assimilation. However, having said all of that, I think the experience for Gen Z is very different to what the last 3 or 4 generations have had, because AI is there in a way that is new and different. The social media effects that Jonathan Haidt has done such a good job promoting and talking about the negative impact on like mental health is there for them, and just being unable to, again, particularly for Gen Z who aren't in the workplace, my advice for anyone entering the work in the first 3 to 5 years, honestly, is be in a workplace, be in an office. I know remote can be great, but if you're new into the job, being with people, learning from other people directly, seeing how people handle clients or handle conflict firsthand, I do think makes a really big difference in your development. So it's not that there's a fundamental deficiency as a generation, but again, we go back to like, what are the opportunities and how we enabling the workforce such that we bring them in and give them what they need.
wow, that's really interesting to think about. So, talk about more of, okay, about Sunny. You could work anywhere. You chose Sunny. Sunny is really rooted in connection and rituals, which is a lot of what we're talking about here. Bring it to life.
Yeah, it's a really special place and a special product that we're building. So we're building a scalable tech integration product. So it's not another application. We don't want it to be that. It's kind of an overlay into your existing combination of Slack or Teams or the places that you already work. And what it does is it learns you as an individual and learns your team preferences. So you talked about the I and the we, it learns both of those things. So at an individual level, we have this social battery assessment, which gets at the reality of it's not introversion, extroversion, like different things energize us in different ways. And we can understand that view of you as an individual. We can understand how the team works. And then based on that, plus some little check-ins on a weekly basis, we can start to recommend to a manager, hey, here's a team experience you might want to run in 5 minutes in the weekly meeting that's just going to move the team towards where they need to be. Whether that's they need connection at this point in time, whether there's actually a little bit of conflict that we can resolve, that we can bring people through, whether actually it's been a really tough quarter and we need just 5 minutes to relax and regroup. So we're working on this really beautiful blend of like, what's the science-backed insights that we can give to managers, and then how do we make it immediately practical, and how do we keep it within the places that you already work? So it's just, again, it's redesigned into the modern workplace and bringing back the things that we took for granted.
So back to our story earlier with what you were saying here about rituals and then how we incorporate in these systems. You said something earlier that really made me think for a second. So someone is, let's call it Gen Z, younger individual in the workplace, and they are a young leader. And so you going back to what you said earlier, you said something about I would recommend anyone that's in the younger, like in their first 5 years, to go work out in the world, like work in the office, like whatever, because you. So I'm just curious, how does it work either with Sunny or your recommendations or whatever? When you have a younger leader, because we want to scale leadership, we want all teams to feel this same way. How do you do that well?
Yeah. And this is where the HR area, the organizational area of like employee enablement or manager enablement is growing really quickly, and I love it because again, I've designed training interventions for over, I don't know, 300, 400 organizations in my career, like a lot of organizations, a lot of training. It's really important work. You cannot, and I don't want to undermine training. Training is really important work, particularly for skill development, where you need to bring a leader out, particularly how's the environment that they're in, they're reacting to, develop real fundamental skill, and then bring them back in. And particularly with modern technology now, we can enable learning in the flow of work in a way that we just couldn't before. So that's what's really exciting about what we're building at Sunny is like, how can we get to a point where we can just predict and know a team and a leader well enough that actually we just go, hey, here's one thing you need right now, do this. And by doing that, what they're doing is it's low cognitive effort. They're applying it because one of the biggest issues with learning and development is you learn and then you don't have an opportunity to immediately apply what you've learned, which is why most learning and development doesn't translate into ROI. So with enablement tools, with like these little just moments in time tools, you can give them what they need at the moment they need to apply it. And that's how learning takes place. And then you get a win from that, you get an impact from that, and you can develop too. And at the same time, I think it's one part of an ecosystem, particularly for an inexperienced leader. Like if you're an inexperienced leader these days, I think you should have mentors. Think you should have coaches. I think you should be going into learning and development. I mean, $200 a year for Coursera, I think is brilliant value. So there's never been more information, more opportunities to learn. And I think there are enablement tools that can just make it really easy in the flow of your work.
That's so cool. So good. It's just so because we were going back to the pandemic. I particularly, in my experience, I had been way out there and been doing remote work for a while, but there are people where it was their first year at work or coming into the workplace, and we have to remember that. That's where it's like, let me tell you my story. Can I hear yours? And let's, figure out how to, meet there.
And I also don't think it stops, by the way. Like just speaking personally for me, one realization I had over the last year is I'm fundamentally responsible for the science and the research and the point of views that we put out at Sunny. And I feel that responsibility, like academia and debate over what science tells us feels more fierce than ever before. And actually a realization I've had is, what, I can better tap into my network to get second opinions on critical decisions, because like the learning and the need for support doesn't stop either, even if you're more experienced as a leader.
Which goes back to my belief that when we are doing something that just excites us and energizes us, that is meaningful work. That is what it is.
I used to do volunteering work for a group in the UK. I don't think they're still around, called the Age of No Retirement, because so much research shows that when you retire and you give up your identity at work, it's too much. It's actually really hard to deal with that. So, like, I think the workplace identity is crucial, and there's just ways we can make it more sustainable, enjoyable, and effective.
Yeah. What we say people for network, I said this a long time ago because of my childhood versus what I do today. Your dinner table is a direct reflection of your work days. It really is. What is the consistent vibration, the frequency, the all of that that's happening there? Is it leaning or lifting? Is it building or tearing? Is it whatever that is? And there's usually consistent patterns, I would guess. You know to tell us for sure. You've got those.
No, I agree. And here's something else, just on a practical basis for people to take away. You have more control individually and as a team than you think. Like, I've had a lot of conversations where people are like, well, what if the organization is toxic? What if there's this? What if there's that? But that's another beautiful thing about the power and control you have with connection and how you work together as a team. You can create your own control, your own climate, your own ways of working in a way that makes it work for you, and creates that shelter, even if you're in an organization where you feel like there's some degree of difficulty or toxicity within the broader organization.
It's so good. Okay, so we're coming to a close here with this episode. I know we could probably talk for another 2 hours. This is really good. I want you to, if you don't mind, Ian, just kind of bring us home here with anything else you want to share about Sunny, and particularly just kind of at the state of today, right now. Like, what are you seeing as the most important just advice that you have for leaders? And then just to make sure that they really understand. I mean, you're always doing research. You are the research, what they could follow you for, and then just making sure anything else with Sunny was shared. And we will put it in the show notes as well. Any links that you'd like.
Yeah, cool. Well, you can check us out at gosunny.org, and you can find me on LinkedIn and us on LinkedIn. Follow me the promise I make is it's always going to be science-based and recent science-based. And I want to go where it's kind of awkward or contrarian or difficult, so if you want to find things that are topical and debate worthy, those are the things that I try to put out there. And then in terms of where to start, think critically about the rhythms and the way in which your teams are working. If you're a manager of a team or a leader of an organization, are there routines and identifiable rhythms that people feel connected into that enable the behaviors that you want your culture to be defined by? There's your starting point, and we can help you develop them, or you can find other ways of developing them. But where are those grounding points in a typical week within your organizational team? Make sure they're there, make sure they're nurtured, make sure they're intentionally built rather than reacting to technology or whatever the latest client demand or work is.
So good. Well, thank you again. Just going back to, if someone feels a part of something, I've always said they will have common language, and they will say, well, this is how we do things around here, right? And relationships always supersede really anything, and yeah, connection first and culture does follow. So good. We'll see you next time.
We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.